I came to America broken. If there is one moment that stays with me, it is this, standing in a crowded, noisy place, surrounded by people, yet feeling so quiet inside that I could hear my own heartbeat. That was my first day in the United States. It was not the movie version of the American dream. No dramatic music. No excitement like new life, new me. Just one small, honest question repeating in my head, am I really supposed to be here? I arrived in America with a suitcase that was not very heavy, but my mind was. I had a job. I had legal papers. I had enough English to survive. But surviving is very different from living. Every morning, I stepped outside, looked at the wide blue sky, and felt strangely empty. The weather was different. Colder. Harsher. And the loneliness felt deeper than I expected. No one really tells you this before you move to the U.S. Climate does not just change your skin, it changes your mood. Winters are long. The sky turns gray. And when it gets dark at 4:30 p.m., your brain quietly believes that the day is already over, even if your life is not. I went to work, came home, ate dinner in silence, and opened YouTube just to hear people talk. Not to study. Just to feel less alone. At that time, English felt like a glass wall. I could hear people clearly. I could understand parts of what they said. But every time I tried to speak, my throat tightened. My brain ran 100 scenarios at once. What if I say it wrong? What if they don't understand me? What if they judge me? So I chose silence. Silence felt safer. At least for a while. At work, I was the person people described as nice but quiet. No one disliked me. But no one really knew me either. I smiled when others smiled. I nodded when others talked. Inside my head, I was always a few seconds behind. Americans speak fast. They use slang. They joke casually. I usually understood the joke 10 seconds later. And by the time I got it, the conversation had already moved on. One evening, I stood in my kitchen and looked out the window. Snow was falling softly. It was beautiful. And suddenly, I started crying. Not because of the snow. But because I realized something painful. I had not told a full story in English since I arrived in America. I existed through short answers. Yes. No. It's okay. I'm fine. Over time, I started believing that I was just fine too. Psychology has a name for this feeling. It's called language insecurity. You know you have the ability, but every time you try to use it, your brain switches to defense mode. Your body reacts as if you are in danger, even though it is just a small conversation. Your heart beats faster. Your hands get cold. Your mouth dries up. And then you blame yourself for not being able to say something so simple. Back then, I did not know these terms. I just knew I was tired. Tired of being strong. Tired of pretending I was okay. Tired of translating the entire world in my head before responding. I started asking myself hard questions. Maybe I am not meant for this place. Maybe the American dream is not for me. The irony is this: during the worst period of my life in the U.S., I started learning English in a way no class ever taught me. Not through textbooks. Not through apps. But through emotions. Through sad days. Through lonely nights. Through a very human desire to be understood and to be myself in any language. If you are watching this and you see yourself in my story, stuck somewhere between B1 and C2, between understanding and not daring to speak, between staying and giving up, I want you to hear this clearly: you are not weak. Your brain is simply trying to protect you using old patterns. And trust me, it can learn new ones. My journey in America did not begin with success. It began with feeling broken. But from that broken place, something unexpected happened. I met someone. Not love at first sight. Not romance right away. Just a quiet, powerful feeling: I feel safe when I speak. And from that moment, everything slowly started to change. English wasn't the hardest part. There was a moment, a very quiet one, when I realized something uncomfortable: English itself was not my biggest problem. Vocabulary was not the enemy. Grammar was not the wall. The hardest part was the feeling that every time I opened my mouth, I was exposing something fragile inside me. It felt less like speaking a language and more like standing under a bright light, hoping no one would notice my mistakes. At first, I blamed English for everything. When I felt tired, I said, "It's because English is hard." When I avoided conversations, I told myself, "I'll speak more when my English improves." But weeks turned into months, and my English did improve, quietly, passively, inside my head. Yet my voice stayed small. Careful. Hidden. I could read emails. I could follow meetings. I could understand instructions at work. On paper, I was doing fine. But real life does not happen on paper. Real life happens in hallways, break rooms, grocery stores, and random small talk that starts with, "How's your day going?" That simple question felt heavier than any English exam I had ever taken. Because how do you answer that honestly when your day feels like a long translation exercise? In the U.S., people talk casually, but confidently. They speak as if their words deserve space. I noticed that early on. Even when they were unsure, they sounded sure. Meanwhile, my brain was busy editing every sentence before it reached my lips. By the time I was ready, the moment had passed. So again, silence won. There's a psychological reason for this, and I learned it much later. When you speak a second language, your brain uses more energy. But when you are emotionally attached to being correct, your brain uses even more. It becomes overloaded. And an overloaded brain chooses the fastest way to feel safe: don't speak. Safety became my invisible goal. I remember standing in line at a coffee shop one morning. The barista smiled and asked something friendly. I understood every word. It was an easy question. But my chest tightened anyway. My mind whispered, what if your accent sounds strange? What if you answer too slowly? In those 2 seconds of hesitation, I could feel my confidence shrinking. I gave a short answer. She smiled. The interaction ended. Safe. But also, empty. That was my pattern. Choose safety. Lose connection. What hurt the most was not that I couldn't express myself perfectly. It was that people never got to know the real me. I had opinions. Humor. Stories. But they stayed locked inside, waiting for a version of English that felt good enough. And that version never arrived, because perfection kept moving further away. In language learning, there is a quiet trap no one warns you about. You think motivation disappears because you are lazy, or busy, or not talented enough. But often, motivation disappears because your emotional system is exhausted. Every conversation feels like a test. Every mistake feels like proof that you don't belong. Over time, your brain starts associating English with stress instead of curiosity. So you avoid it. Not consciously. Gently. Automatically. I started noticing how often I said, "I'm okay," even when I wasn't. Not just in English, but emotionally. That phrase became my shield. Short sentences. Neutral tone. No risk. No depth. And slowly, my world in America became smaller. Work. Home. Repeat. Then one evening, something small but important happened. I was scrolling through my phone, half listening to a video in English. The speaker said a simple sentence, "You don't need better English. You need a safer place to use it." I froze. It felt like that sentence was talking directly to me. A safer place. Not a classroom. Not a textbook. Not even a perfect accent. Just a place, maybe a person, where mistakes were not dangerous. Where pauses were allowed. Where my thoughts didn't need to arrive fully polished. That idea stayed with me. It made me question everything I believed about language learning. What if progress wasn't about pushing harder? What if it was about feeling safe enough to try? Neuroscience supports this more than we realize. When you feel emotionally safe, your brain's learning centers activate more easily. Memory improves. Speech flows better. When you feel threatened, even socially threatened, your brain shifts resources away from language and toward survival. In simple words, fear makes you quiet. Safety makes you speak. At that time, I didn't have that safety yet. But for the first time, I could see what was missing. It wasn't confidence. Confidence comes later. It wasn't fluency. Fluency grows slowly. What I needed first was permission to be imperfect, out loud. If you are listening to this and nodding quietly, maybe you know this feeling too. You understand more than you speak. You practice alone. You watch videos. But when it's time to talk, something tightens inside you. That doesn't mean you are bad at English. It means your nervous system hasn't learned that English is safe. And that can be changed. Looking back, this was the chapter of my life where everything still felt heavy, but the direction was starting to shift. I didn't know it yet, but soon I would meet someone who didn't correct my grammar, didn't rush my words, and didn't make me feel small for speaking slowly. Someone who listened, even when my sentences were broken. Not a teacher. Not a tutor. A human being. And that's where this story truly begins. Living and working in silence. Silence is a strange thing. At first, it feels polite. Then it feels safe. And one day, you realize it has quietly taken over your life. By the third month of living and working in the United States, silence had become my routine. I woke up early, drove to work, greeted people with a smile, and spoke only when necessary. My English was not bad. But my voice felt optional. As if the world around me would keep moving just fine without hearing what I thought. At work, I learned quickly how to survive without speaking much. I observed. I copied. I listened carefully to how people phrased emails, how they joked during meetings, how they complained casually about traffic or weather. Crazy weather today, right? Someone would say. I would smile and nod. Always nodding. Always agreeing. Always present, but never fully there. My job required focus, not conversation, and that made it easier to hide. In meetings, I prepared answers in my head, rehearsed them silently, word by word. But when the moment came, someone else spoke first. Louder. Faster. More confidently. And just like that, my answer expired. I told myself, next time. There were many next times. Lunch breaks were the hardest. Americans are friendly, but their friendliness moves fast. Conversations start and end without warning. Topics jump from weekend plans to TV shows to childhood memories in seconds. I sat at the table, listening, laughing a second too late, carefully holding my food so my hands wouldn't shake. I was there, but I was also somewhere else, inside my head, translating everything. There is a special kind of loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people who don't know you. Not because they don't care, but because you don't know how to show yourself. I felt that loneliness every day. And the strange part was, no one could see it. On the outside, I looked calm. Functional. Independent. Inside, I felt muted. After work, the silence followed me home. My apartment was quiet. No familiar voices. No shared language that felt effortless. I cooked simple meals and ate while watching English videos, convincing myself I was practicing. But really, I was just listening to people live the life I wanted, the life where words came out naturally. Sometimes, I practiced speaking out loud to myself. Short sentences. Everyday phrases. Today was busy. I'm tired, but it's okay. My pronunciation sounded strange in my own ears. Too careful. Too slow. I wondered if this was how I would sound forever, technically correct, emotionally distant. Psychologists talk about something called social invisibility. It happens when you feel unseen, even though you are physically present. Immigrants experience this a lot. You lose the language that once carried your personality, your humor, your confidence. And until the new language grows strong enough, you exist in between, neither fully silent, nor fully heard. That was me. Living in between. One afternoon, something small happened that stayed with me. A coworker asked me a genuine question about my background. Where I was from. Why I came to the U.S. I felt my chest tighten, but I also felt something else, hope. I wanted to answer. Not just with facts, but with meaning. I started speaking slowly. My sentences were simple. I paused often. She waited. She didn't interrupt. She didn't finish my sentences for me. When I finished, she smiled and said, "That must have been really hard." That was it. No grammar correction. No awkward silence. Just understanding. For the rest of the day, I felt lighter. Not confident. Not fluent. Just lighter. Like my voice had taken up a little more space than usual. That moment showed me something important. Silence wasn't always chosen. Sometimes, it was learned. And what is learned can be unlearned. Still, most days, silence won. It was easier. Familiar. My nervous system trusted it. Speaking felt like stepping onto thin ice. Even when nothing bad happened, my body reacted as if something might. This is how fear works. It doesn't need proof. It just needs memory. Neuroscience explains this simply. When your brain senses uncertainty, especially social uncertainty, it activates protection mode. Muscles tense. Breathing changes. Language becomes secondary. The goal is not connection. The goal is safety. And silence often feels safer than risk. But safety without connection slowly becomes a cage. I began to notice how much energy it took to stay quiet. Holding back thoughts. Swallowing reactions. Pretending I didn't have questions. By the end of the day, I was exhausted, not from work, but from not being myself. That exhaustion started to change something inside me. It made me restless. Curious. Ready for something different. I didn't know it yet, but this quiet phase was preparing me. Teaching me how much words mattered. Teaching me what it felt like to not be heard, so that when someone finally did hear me, I would never take it for granted. Soon, my routine would break. Not because my English suddenly improved. Not because I became brave overnight. But because I would meet someone who didn't see my silence as a weakness. Someone who listened between my pauses. Someone who made space instead of filling it. And when that happened, my life in America would slowly begin to speak back to me. Climate, culture, and loneliness. Loneliness doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives quietly, disguised as weather, habits, or cultural differences you didn't know would matter this much. By the time my first real American winter arrived, I understood something important. The climate was not just outside my window. It had moved inside me. The cold felt sharper than I expected. Not painful, just persistent. It followed me from the parking lot to the office, from the grocery store back to my apartment. And with it came a strange emotional heaviness that I had never experienced this way before. In my home country, weather changed, but life stayed loud. Here, winter felt like a pause button. People went from cars to buildings quickly. Conversations became shorter. Smiles were polite but brief. No one was unkind. But no one lingered either. I started to understand why Americans talk so much about the weather. It's not small talk. It's survival language. At work, people joked about winter blues. "This weather makes me want to hibernate," someone said, laughing. I laughed too. But inside, I wondered if something was wrong with me, because I wasn't joking. I felt myself shrinking. Less energy. Less motivation. Less desire to speak, even when I knew the words. Cultural differences amplified that feeling. In the U.S., independence is respected. Privacy is normal. Asking for help feels optional, sometimes even unnecessary. Back home, silence meant something was wrong. Here, silence often meant nothing at all. People assumed you were fine unless you said otherwise. And since I didn't know how to say otherwise, I stayed fine. Officially. I noticed how often Americans asked, "How are you?" And how rarely they waited for a real answer. At first, this confused me. Then I adapted. "Good, how about you?" became automatic. Quick. Safe. Socially correct. But emotionally empty. Over time, those exchanges trained my brain to stay on the surface. Deep feelings didn't fit the rhythm. My loneliness didn't come from being alone. It came from feeling different in ways I couldn't explain easily. I didn't miss home in a dramatic way. I missed small things. Familiar jokes. Shared assumptions. The comfort of not having to explain myself. In America, everything needed explanation: my accent, my pauses, my background, my reactions. Even my silence felt like something I had to justify. Psychologists talk about cultural fatigue. It happens when your brain is constantly adjusting to new rules, spoken and unspoken. How close to stand. How loud to speak. When to interrupt. When to stop. Each small decision costs energy. And when that energy runs out, the first thing to disappear is connection. I felt that fatigue in my body. My shoulders were tense. My jaw hurt from holding words in. At night, I replayed conversations in my head, correcting sentences that had already passed. I should have said this. I could have explained that better. My brain treated every interaction like unfinished homework. To cope, I created routines. Predictable ones. Same route to work. Same grocery store. Same meal rotations. Routines reduced language. Reduced risk. Reduced the chance of feeling exposed. They also reduced my world. Slowly, quietly. One weekend, I realized I had not spoken out loud to another person for almost 2 full days. No arguments. No laughter. Just transactions. Receipt? Thank you. Have a good one. I stood in my kitchen, coffee in hand, and felt a sudden wave of sadness. Not dramatic. Just deep. The kind that makes you sit down because standing feels like too much. Loneliness, I learned, isn't always about missing people. Sometimes it's about missing yourself. The version of you that jokes easily. That speaks without planning. That exists without translation. And yet, even in that heavy season, small signs of warmth appeared. A neighbor holding the door a second longer. A coworker remembering my name. A cashier asking where my accent was from, not with judgment, but curiosity. These moments didn't fix anything, but they cracked something open. There's a concept in psychology called microconnections. Tiny moments of human recognition that, over time, build a sense of belonging. At first, I dismissed them. They felt too small to matter. But when everything feels cold, even a little warmth is noticeable. I started to answer questions with one extra sentence. Not much. Just a little. If someone asked where I was from, I didn't just name the country. I added how long I had been in the U.S. If someone commented on the weather, I shared how different it felt from home. These were not conversations. They were openings. And something interesting happened. People leaned in. Not physically, but emotionally. They listened. They responded. Sometimes they asked more. Sometimes they didn't. But each time I spoke, even briefly, the loneliness loosened its grip just a bit. I still felt different. I still felt tired. But I no longer felt invisible. Looking back, this phase of my life taught me something essential. Loneliness is not a personal failure. It is often a natural response to change, climate, and culture colliding at the same time. And it doesn't mean you are doing life wrong. It means you are adapting. I didn't know it then, but this slow adaptation was preparing me for connection. Real connection. The kind that doesn't rush you. The kind that makes space for your story, even when it comes out slowly. Soon, I would meet someone who didn't see my differences as distance. Someone who didn't try to fill the silence, but shared it. And in that shared space, something unexpected would begin. I met my best friend unexpectedly. If you had asked me back then what kind of person would change my life, I would have given you the wrong answer. I would have said someone confident. Someone fluent. Someone loud enough to pull me out of my silence. What actually happened was much quieter than that. And much more powerful. I didn't meet my best friend in a romantic way. No dramatic first impression. No instant connection. We met the way many real stories begin in America, through routine. Same place. Same time. Over and over again. Familiarity came first. Meaning came later. It started with small moments. Shared elevators. Brief greetings. A simple hey that slowly turned into how's your day going? Nothing deep. Nothing planned. But there was something different in the way they spoke to me. They didn't rush. They didn't simplify their English too much. They just waited. And that waiting felt like an invitation. At first, I answered the way I always did. Short sentences. Safe words. Neutral tone. Good. Busy. Same as usual. My voice stayed low, like it didn't want to take up space. But they didn't fill the silence for me. They let it exist. And strangely, that made me want to speak more, not less. There was one afternoon I remember clearly. We were both tired. The kind of tired that doesn't need explanation. They asked a simple question about my background. I started answering, then stopped, searching for the right words. I expected the usual polite nod, the gentle move to another topic. Instead, they said, "Take your time. Take your time." That sentence landed differently. It wasn't encouragement. It wasn't instruction. It was permission. My nervous system felt it before my brain did. My shoulders dropped. My breath slowed. I finished my sentence. It wasn't perfect. But it was mine. From that day on, our conversations grew slowly. Not longer. Just more real. We talked about work stress. About weather. About food. About how strange American portion sizes are. Sometimes I struggled. Sometimes I repeated myself. Sometimes I used the wrong word. And every time, nothing bad happened. That's how trust begins. Not with big promises, but with repeated proof that you are safe. Psychology calls this relational safety. When another person consistently responds without judgment, your brain starts to relax. Language flows better. Memory improves. Humor returns. You stop monitoring yourself so closely. You stop translating every thought before letting it out. You start being present. I didn't notice the change at first. It showed up in small ways. I laughed more. I interrupted sometimes. I shared opinions without preparing them in advance. I even disagreed once, and survived. That was new. At some point, I realized something surprising. I was speaking more English with this person than with anyone else, and I wasn't exhausted afterward. Normally, conversations drained me. This one energized me. Not because my English was better, but because I wasn't performing. I was just communicating. One evening, after a long day, we sat somewhere quiet. I told a story from my life back home. It was emotional. Personal. I spoke slowly. I searched for words. There were pauses long enough to feel uncomfortable, at least by American standards. But they stayed. They listened. When I finished, they didn't comment on my English. They commented on my experience. "That must have shaped you a lot," they said. In that moment, I felt something shift. I wasn't just practicing English anymore. I was being understood through it. That's when I started to realize, this person wasn't just someone I talked to easily. They were becoming my safe place. Not because they fixed anything, but because they didn't need me to be anything other than what I was. Our relationship didn't change overnight. It didn't suddenly become romantic. It deepened in a way that felt solid, not exciting. We became friends who noticed each other. Friends who remembered details. Friends who checked in without a reason. And somewhere in that quiet consistency, my English changed again. Not dramatically. Not magically. It became warmer. More flexible. More alive. I started using English not just to function, but to connect. There's research that supports this. Language acquisition improves when emotional engagement is high and anxiety is low. Your brain learns faster when it associates language with connection instead of evaluation. In simple terms, when you care about the person, you care less about being perfect. And that's when progress happens. Looking back, meeting my best friend didn't just change my social life. It changed my relationship with English. For the first time, English wasn't a test. It was a bridge. If you are listening to this and hoping for a breakthrough, here's the quiet truth. You don't need more pressure. You don't need to push harder. You need at least one place, one person, one moment where your English is allowed to be human. I didn't know it yet, but this friendship was slowly becoming something more. Not because we planned it, but because safety has a way of growing roots. And once it does, it changes how you see everything, language, love, and yourself. Soon, I would have to face a new question. Not about English. Not about America. But about what happens when your safe place becomes the center of your life. Climate, culture, and loneliness. Loneliness doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives quietly, disguised as weather, habits, or cultural differences you didn't know would matter this much. By the time my first real American winter arrived, I understood something important. The climate was not just outside my window. It had moved inside me. The cold felt sharper than I expected. Not painful, just persistent. It followed me from the parking lot to the office, from the grocery store back to my apartment. And with it came a strange emotional heaviness that I had never experienced this way before. In my home country, weather changed, but life stayed loud. Here, winter felt like a pause button. People went from cars to buildings quickly. Conversations became shorter. Smiles were polite but brief. No one was unkind. But no one lingered either. I started to understand why Americans talk so much about the weather. It's not small talk. It's survival language. At work, people joked about winter blues. This weather makes me want to hibernate, someone said, laughing. I laughed too. But inside, I wondered if something was wrong with me, because I wasn't joking. I felt myself shrinking. Less energy. Less motivation. Less desire to speak, even when I knew the words. Cultural differences amplified that feeling. In the U.S., independence is respected. Privacy is normal. Asking for help feels optional, sometimes even unnecessary. Back home, silence meant something was wrong. Here, silence often meant nothing at all. People assumed you were fine unless you said otherwise. And since I didn't know how to say otherwise, I stayed fine. Officially. I noticed how often Americans asked, "How are you?" and how rarely they waited for a real answer. At first, this confused me. Then I adapted. "Good, how about you?" became automatic. Quick. Safe. Socially correct. But emotionally empty. Over time, those exchanges trained my brain to stay on the surface. Deep feelings didn't fit the rhythm. My loneliness didn't come from being alone. It came from feeling different in ways I couldn't explain easily. I didn't miss home in a dramatic way. I missed small things. Familiar jokes. Shared assumptions. The comfort of not having to explain myself. In America, everything needed explanation: my accent, my pauses, my background, my reactions. Even my silence felt like something I had to justify. Psychologists talk about cultural fatigue. It happens when your brain is constantly adjusting to new rules, spoken and unspoken. How close to stand. How loud to speak. When to interrupt. When to stop. Each small decision costs energy. And when that energy runs out, the first thing to disappear is connection. I felt that fatigue in my body. My shoulders were tense. My jaw hurt from holding words in. At night, I replayed conversations in my head, correcting sentences that had already passed. I should have said this. I could have explained that better. My brain treated every interaction like unfinished homework. To cope, I created routines. Predictable ones. Same route to work. Same grocery store. Same meal rotations. Routines reduced language. Reduced risk. Reduced the chance of feeling exposed. They also reduced my world. Slowly, quietly. One weekend, I realized I had not spoken out loud to another person for almost 2 full days. No arguments. No laughter. Just transactions. Receipt? Thank you. Have a good one. I stood in my kitchen, coffee in hand, and felt a sudden wave of sadness. Not dramatic. Just deep. The kind that makes you sit down because standing feels like too much. Loneliness, I learned, isn't always about missing people. Sometimes it's about missing yourself. The version of you that jokes easily. That speaks without planning. That exists without translation. And yet, even in that heavy season, small signs of warmth appeared. A neighbor holding the door a second longer. A coworker remembering my name. A cashier asking where my accent was from, not with judgment, but curiosity. These moments didn't fix anything, but they cracked something open. There's a concept in psychology called microconnections. Tiny moments of human recognition that, over time, build a sense of belonging. At first, I dismissed them. They felt too small to matter. But when everything feels cold, even a little warmth is noticeable. I started to answer questions with one extra sentence. Not much. Just a little. If someone asked where I was from, I didn't just name the country. I added how long I had been in the U.S. If someone commented on the weather, I shared how different it felt from home. These were not conversations. They were openings. And something interesting happened. People leaned in. Not physically, but emotionally. They listened. They responded. Sometimes they asked more. Sometimes they didn't. But each time I spoke, even briefly, the loneliness loosened its grip just a bit. I still felt different. I still felt tired. But I no longer felt invisible. Looking back, this phase of my life taught me something essential. Loneliness is not a personal failure. It is often a natural response to change, climate, and culture colliding at the same time. And it doesn't mean you are doing life wrong. It means you are adapting. I didn't know it then, but this slow adaptation was preparing me for connection. Real connection. The kind that doesn't rush you. The kind that makes space for your story, even when it comes out slowly. Soon, I would meet someone who didn't see my differences as distance. Someone who didn't try to fill the silence, but shared it. And in that shared space, something unexpected would begin. When marriage tested everything. Love feels gentle when life is calm. But marriage doesn't wait for calm. It steps into your life exactly where things are unfinished and asks, quietly but firmly, "Can you stay here?" When we decided to get married, nothing dramatic happened. No movie-style proposal. No sudden certainty. Just a slow, honest realization that we were already choosing each other every day. Friendship came first. Safety came second. Commitment came last, and it came with weight. That was when everything was tested. Marriage didn't break our relationship, but it revealed it. Especially in a country like the United States, where expectations around marriage are often unspoken but strong. Independence. Clear communication. Emotional transparency. These sound simple, but when English is not your first language, they become complicated very fast. I noticed it first during arguments. In my native language, I knew how to soften words. How to express frustration without sounding harsh. In English, everything felt sharper. Shorter sentences sounded colder. Directness felt like aggression. And when emotions were high, my vocabulary shrank. I wanted to explain how I felt. What came out instead was silence. Silence again, but this time, it wasn't safe. My partner didn't panic. But I could see confusion. In American culture, silence during conflict often feels like distance. Like avoidance. Like shutting down. For me, silence meant, "I'm trying not to hurt you." For them, silence meant, "I don't know where you are." That gap hurt both of us. There were moments when I thought, maybe love is easier than marriage. Love lets you rest. Marriage asks you to show up, again and again, even when your words feel heavy in your mouth. I remember one night clearly. We were tired. The kind of tired that makes small problems feel huge. I was trying to explain something emotional, something layered, something I didn't yet have the English for. Halfway through, I stopped. My eyes filled with tears. Not because of the argument, but because I felt trapped inside my own thoughts. My partner waited. Then gently said, "I don't need perfect English. I just need you." That sentence didn't solve the problem. But it changed the room. Marriage taught me something language classes never did. Communication is not about sounding right. It's about staying present. And presence doesn't always need elegant words. Sometimes it needs honesty. Sometimes it needs repetition. Sometimes it needs saying the same sentence 3 times until it finally lands. From a psychological perspective, conflict is where emotional safety is truly measured. Anyone can be kind when things are easy. Safety shows up when things are uncomfortable. When misunderstandings happen. When culture, upbringing, and language collide. We started to build new habits. Instead of arguing in the heat of the moment, we learned to pause. Instead of assuming intention, we asked questions. Simple ones. What did you mean by that? Can you say it another way? I might be misunderstanding, help me understand. Those sentences became bridges. I also learned to name my limitations. I would say, "I know what I feel, but I don't know the best English yet." Saying that out loud felt vulnerable. But it removed pressure from both of us. It turned conflict into collaboration. Neuroscience backs this up. When people feel misunderstood, their brains activate threat responses. When people feel heard, even imperfectly, the nervous system calms down. Language improves when fear decreases. Emotional clarity follows safety. Marriage didn't magically make my English better. But it forced my English to become more real. We talked about money. About family expectations. About immigration stress. About work-life balance in America. These were not textbook topics. These were real-life conversations with consequences. And slowly, my English adapted, not to sound impressive, but to function deeply. There were cultural shocks too. In my culture, endurance is often valued. You stay quiet. You adapt. In American culture, expression is encouraged. You speak up. You clarify. Learning to do that, in a second language, inside a marriage, was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But it was also where growth accelerated. I stopped trying to sound correct and started trying to be clear. I stopped avoiding difficult conversations and started entering them slowly. I learned that saying "I need time to think" is better than disappearing. That saying "I don't have the words yet" is still communication. Marriage didn't remove my accent. It didn't fix my grammar. What it did was give my English a purpose beyond survival. English became the language where we built a life. And here's the truth I didn't expect. When your partner feels safe to you, but you don't feel safe with yourself, marriage will expose that gap. Not to punish you, but to invite you to grow. There were moments I wondered if love was enough. Then I realized love was never meant to be enough by itself. Safety is built daily through listening, through patience, through choosing understanding over winning. By this point in my life, I could no longer pretend English was just a tool. It had become part of my emotional system. How I loved, how I argued, how I repaired. And that led me to a question that would shape everything that came next. Is your partner just someone you love? Or are they your safe place even when things fall apart? That question didn't have an easy answer. But searching for it would change how I understood marriage, language, and myself. When love becomes a quiet choice. There was a phase in our marriage that didn't look dramatic from the outside. No big fights. No doors slammed. No ultimatums. Just silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that slowly fills a room when two people are tired, busy, and emotionally stretched thin. At that time, we were already living and working in the United States for several years. On paper, things looked stable. We both had jobs. We paid our bills. We were doing what adults are supposed to do. But emotionally, something felt off. I remember coming home late one night, dropping my bag by the door, and realizing we hadn't really talked in days. We had exchanged information, schedules, groceries, reminders, but not feelings. In English, there's a phrase I learned around then. We're roommates, not partners. It hit me harder than I expected. Because that's exactly how it felt. We shared space, responsibilities, and routines. But the emotional warmth, the sense of us, felt distant. Not gone. Just quiet. And that scared me more than anger ever could. Living in the U.S. teaches you efficiency. Work faster. Plan better. Optimize everything. But love doesn't respond well to optimization. Love responds to attention. One evening, while folding laundry together in silence, I finally asked something simple. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Are you okay with us? My partner paused. Just for a second. But I noticed. Then came a long exhale. I don't know, they said. I'm just tired. Not tired of me. Not tired of marriage. Just tired. That distinction mattered. In real English, I'm tired often means more than physical exhaustion. It can mean emotionally overloaded, mentally drained, or quietly overwhelmed. I realized then that we weren't falling apart. We were running on empty. Immigration stress, cultural adjustment, career pressure, and the constant need to prove ourselves in a foreign country, it all adds up. Slowly. Invisibly. Marriage doesn't collapse all at once. It erodes in small, unnoticed moments. Missed check-ins. Unspoken worries. Assumptions instead of conversations. That night, we didn't solve anything. We didn't have a breakthrough talk. No dramatic reconciliation scene. We just sat on the floor, surrounded by unfolded clothes, and stayed there longer than usual. In the U.S., people often say, love is a choice. At first, that sounded unromantic to me. But now I understand it differently. Love is the choice to stay present when it's easier to disconnect. The choice to listen when you're already tired. The choice to care, even when nothing feels urgent. Over the next weeks, we made small changes. Nothing Instagram-worthy. We stopped multitasking during meals. We took short walks without phones. We asked one real question a day, and actually waited for the answer. How was today, really? What's been heavy on your mind? What do you need from me this week? Simple questions. Hard honesty. Sometimes the answers were uncomfortable. Sometimes they revealed how much we had both been holding back, not because we didn't trust each other, but because we didn't want to add more burden. But that's the paradox of marriage. Silence doesn't protect love. Communication does. There's another English phrase I learned later. Your partner should be your safe place. Not your solution. Not your therapist. But a place where you don't have to perform. I began to ask myself a hard question. Was I being a safe place, or just a busy one? Because safety isn't created by grand gestures. It's built through consistency. Through showing up when it's inconvenient. Through staying curious about someone you think you already know. Living in America changed us, individually and as a couple. It made us stronger, but also more guarded. More independent. More self-reliant. And while independence is valuable, intimacy requires vulnerability. You can't protect your heart and expect closeness at the same time. Slowly, something shifted. Not overnight. Not perfectly. But the silence began to feel different. Less heavy. More restful. We laughed more easily. We disagreed more honestly. We stopped pretending we were fine when we weren't. And in that honesty, safety returned. If you're listening to this and wondering whether marrying your best friend guarantees a smooth journey, the answer is no. But it does give you something rare. A foundation. Friendship doesn't eliminate hardship. It gives you a language to face it together. And sometimes, love isn't about passion or excitement. Sometimes, love is the quiet decision to sit on the floor, surrounded by unfinished laundry, and choose each other again, without applause. Without certainty, but with intention. And this is only one chapter. Because the real question isn't whether your partner is your safe place. It's whether you're willing to build that place, again and again, especially when life in a new country keeps testing everything you thought you knew. We're not done yet. And if you stay with me, the next part will take us into a moment when that safety was tested in a way we never expected. When safety is suddenly shaken. There's a moment in every long marriage when you realize safety isn't permanent. You don't lose it all at once. You feel it shift. For us, it happened during what should have been a normal week. Work was busy. Life was routine. Nothing unusual, until one phone call changed the emotional temperature of everything. It came in the middle of the afternoon. A short call. A calm voice. Too calm. I remember hearing the words, but not fully understanding them at first. We're making some changes, your position is affected. In the U.S., that sentence carries weight. It doesn't sound dramatic. It sounds professional. But it lands like a quiet earthquake. When I hung up, I sat there longer than I expected. Not panicking. Not crying. Just frozen. In English, there's a phrase people use often. I didn't see it coming. That was exactly it. When I told my partner that evening, I watched their face carefully. I was afraid of what I might see: fear, disappointment, stress. Instead, they just nodded slowly and said, "Okay. We'll figure it out." That word mattered more than any reassurance. But here's the truth people don't talk about enough. Even when your partner shows up calmly, job uncertainty changes the dynamic of a marriage. Especially as immigrants. Especially in a country where work is closely tied to identity and security. Suddenly, questions appear everywhere. What about health insurance? What about rent? What about visas, timelines, plans? And underneath all of that, ego. In American culture, there's a lot of emphasis on being productive, successful, and self-sufficient. Losing a job doesn't just affect income. It touches pride. I didn't say much that night. I didn't want to worry them. I didn't want to sound weak. But silence crept back in, not the same silence as before, but a heavier one. This time, it was filled with self-doubt. There's an English phrase that describes it well. I feel like a burden. I never said it out loud. But I felt it. I started pulling away, not intentionally, but instinctively. Spending more time alone. Applying for jobs late at night. Pretending everything was fine. My partner noticed before I did. One evening, they said something that stopped me. You don't have to carry this by yourself. I replied automatically. I know. But what I meant was, I don't know how not to. Because independence had become my armor. Living in the U.S. teaches you to hustle, to adapt, to survive. You learn to rely on yourself. And that's powerful. But marriage asks for something different. It asks you to be seen, even when you don't feel impressive. That week, we had one of the most honest conversations of our marriage. Not emotional. Not loud. Just real. They told me they were scared too, but not of money. They were afraid I would shut them out. That I would stop trusting them as my safe place. And that's when it clicked. Safety isn't only about comfort. Sometimes, safety is about letting someone see you when you feel small. In real English, people often say, "Let me be there for you." It sounds simple. But accepting that offer can be harder than offering it. I realized I had been confusing strength with silence. But strength, in a partnership, looks different. It looks like saying, "I'm not okay, but I'm still here." It looks like sharing uncertainty instead of hiding it. Over the next days, we adjusted again. We talked openly about worst-case scenarios. We reviewed finances together. We made plans and backup plans. Not with fear, but with honesty. And something unexpected happened. Instead of creating distance, the uncertainty brought us closer. We became more intentional, more gentle with each other. We celebrated small things. A good interview. A quiet dinner. A shared laugh in the middle of stress. There's a phrase I learned during that time. We're in this together. It sounds cliché. But when life tests you, clichés turn into anchors. I won't pretend it was easy. There were nights I stared at the ceiling, calculating timelines in my head. There were mornings when motivation felt forced. But I never felt alone. And that made all the difference. Because a safe place isn't a life without problems. It's a place where problems don't turn into isolation. Eventually, things stabilized. Not perfectly, but enough. And when they did, I looked back and realized something important. That moment, when safety was shaken, didn't break our marriage. It clarified it. It showed us what we were really built on. Not convenience. Not success. Not smooth seasons. But trust. And trust isn't proven when life is easy. It's proven when uncertainty walks in and stays for a while. If you're listening to this and you're in a season where work, money, or identity feels unstable, I want you to hear this clearly. Your worth is not your job title. And your marriage is not a scoreboard. Being a safe place means choosing connection over pride. And sometimes, the strongest thing you can say is, I need you right now. Because the next chapter of our story didn't come from stability. It came from what happened after, when we had to decide what kind of future we were building together. And that's where this journey gets even more real. Redefining the dream we came here for. When things finally stabilized, something unexpected happened. We didn't feel relief. We felt quiet. Not the heavy silence from before. A different kind. The kind that shows up when you realize the old plan no longer fits who you've become. We had come to the United States with a clear picture in mind. Work hard. Build careers. Create a better life. That phrase, a better life, sounds inspiring. But it's also vague. And vagueness can hide a lot of pressure. After everything we had been through, we started asking questions we had postponed for years. What are we actually chasing? Whose definition of success are we following? And at what cost? In English, people often say, just because you can, doesn't mean you should. That sentence stayed with me. We could keep pushing. We could aim higher, faster, bigger. But did we want to? One evening, we sat at the kitchen table long after dinner. No phones. No agenda. Just two people who had survived something together and were finally brave enough to talk about what came next. My partner said something I didn't expect. I don't want to live in survival mode anymore. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Just honest. And I realized I felt the same. For years, especially as immigrants, we had been in constant proving mode. Proving we belonged. Proving we were capable. Proving the move was worth it. But survival mode has a cost. It keeps you alert, but not present. Productive, but not fulfilled. In real English, there's a phrase that describes it well. Running on autopilot. That's what we had been doing. So we asked a different kind of question. Not what's next, but what matters now. The answers weren't clear right away. We talked about work, about money, about stability. But those were surface level. Underneath, the real themes kept returning. Time, health, connection, and something else, identity. Living in the U.S. had shaped us, but it had also pulled us away from parts of ourselves. We had adapted so well that we forgot to check in with who we were becoming. I asked my partner, if we weren't afraid, what would we choose? They didn't answer immediately. Instead, they smiled softly and said, I'd choose a life that feels like ours, not just impressive. That sentence shifted everything. Because somewhere along the way, we had started building a life that looked good on paper but felt heavy in practice. So we made a decision. Not a dramatic one. Not a risky one, at least not externally. But internally, it was huge. We decided to slow down. To redefine success on our own terms. That meant setting boundaries at work. Reconsidering timelines. Letting go of some expectations we had inherited from culture, from family, from society. In American culture, there's a lot of respect for ambition. And that's not a bad thing. But ambition without alignment leads to burnout. We learned to ask each other better questions. Does this bring us closer, or just busier? Is this moving us forward, or just keeping us occupied? What kind of life do we want to wake up to in 5 years? Sometimes the answers surprised us. Sometimes they scared us. But we stayed in the conversation. Marriage, I've learned, isn't about having the same dreams forever. It's about having the courage to update them together. There were moments of doubt. What if slowing down meant falling behind? What if redefining success meant disappointing others? What if we were making a mistake? Those fears were real. But so was the exhaustion we felt when we ignored them. In English, there's a saying. You can have anything, but not everything. We finally understood what that meant. Choosing peace might mean less prestige. Choosing presence might mean fewer achievements. But what we gained was clarity. And clarity creates safety. We became more intentional with our time. More honest about our limits. More supportive of each other's growth, even when it didn't fit a traditional path. Something else shifted too. Our conversations changed. We talked less about what we should do, and more about what felt right. We laughed more. We dreamed differently. Not smaller dreams. Just truer ones. If you're listening to this and questioning the path you're on, especially in a place like the U.S., where success has a loud definition, I want you to know something. You're allowed to redefine the dream. You're allowed to change your mind. You're allowed to choose a life that feels safe, meaningful, and human. Marriage doesn't mean holding on to the same plan forever. It means holding on to each other while the plan evolves. And as we made these changes, we didn't realize yet that a new challenge was quietly approaching, one that would test not just our choices, but our values. Because the next chapter of our story isn't about work or money. It's about identity, belonging, and a question we never thought we'd have to answer. And that question changes everything. When belonging became the hardest question. There's a moment in every long journey when the road stops feeling like an adventure and starts feeling like a mirror. For us, that moment didn't come with drama. It came quietly. One morning, standing in line at a grocery store, surrounded by familiar sounds, familiar faces, familiar routines, I felt strangely distant. Not lost. Just detached. I had learned the language. Understood the culture. Built a life that worked. And yet, a simple question started repeating in my mind. Do I actually belong here? In English, people often talk about feeling at home. But what if you feel comfortable without feeling rooted? That's a confusing place to live. At first, I thought it was just burnout. Or nostalgia. Or one of those emotional dips everyone talks about. But the feeling stayed. At work, I noticed it more. In conversations, I heard it in my own voice. I spoke fluently, clearly, but something felt borrowed. Like I was using a version of myself that fit the room, not the truth. My partner noticed before I said anything. You've been quieter lately, they said one evening. Not accusing. Just observant. I didn't answer right away. Because I didn't know how to explain something I hadn't fully named yet. Eventually, the words came out slowly. I don't know where I belong anymore. That sentence scared me. Because it didn't mean I wanted to leave. And it didn't mean I wanted to stay. It meant I was standing in between. In real English, there's a phrase for this feeling. Caught in limbo. That was us. Too changed to go back. Too uncertain to fully settle. Immigration teaches you many things. One of them is that belonging isn't automatic. It's negotiated daily. You negotiate your accent, your habits, your reactions, and over time, you get good at it. So good that you forget which parts were adjusted and which were original. That realization hit hard. I started asking myself uncomfortable questions. Am I choosing this life, or just continuing it? Am I present, or just performing? If no one was watching, would I live the same way? Those questions don't come with quick answers. They sit with you. They interrupt your sleep. They show up in quiet moments. My partner had their own version of this struggle. Different details. Same core feeling. We were both asking, is this where we grow, or where we stay safe? One night, we talked longer than usual. Not to solve anything. Just to say things out loud. We talked about identity. About roots. About the cost of adaptation. My partner said something that reframed everything. Maybe belonging isn't about the place. Maybe it's about who you're becoming there. That idea stayed with me. Because I had been treating belonging like a destination. A stamp of approval. A final arrival. But maybe it's a process. In psychology, there's a concept called identity integration. It means learning to hold multiple versions of yourself without forcing them to compete. Not choosing between who you were and who you are, but letting them coexist. That sounded good in theory. Harder in practice. Some days, I wanted certainty. A clear decision. A sign. Other days, I just wanted peace. We considered big questions. What if we moved again? What if we stayed but changed direction? What if the discomfort wasn't a warning, but an invitation? In English, there's a saying. Growth feels like confusion before it feels like clarity. That was exactly it. The discomfort wasn't screaming. It was whispering. And whispers are easy to ignore, until they aren't. What helped us was not rushing. We stopped treating the question of belonging as a problem to fix. Instead, we treated it as a conversation to stay in. We traveled less externally, and reflected more internally. We paid attention to moments when we felt most like ourselves. And moments when we felt most drained. Patterns emerged. Belonging wasn't about location. It was about alignment. When our values matched our actions, the discomfort softened. When they didn't, it returned. Marriage mattered deeply here. Because when you question your identity, you don't want someone who tells you what to do. You want someone who sits with you in the uncertainty. Someone who says, "We don't have to decide today." That kind of partnership creates safety, not because it removes doubt, but because it makes doubt survivable. Slowly, the question shifted. From "Do I belong here?" to "What kind of life do we want to belong to?" That question opened a new door. One we didn't even know existed yet. Because just as we started finding peace with uncertainty, life presented us with a moment that demanded a choice. A moment that tested not just our identity, but our definition of family, commitment, and home. And that moment would lead us to the most meaningful decision of our journey. The one that finally answered the question we had been circling all along. I married my best friend. The moment that changed everything didn't look special from the outside. No big announcement. No dramatic turning point. No applause. It happened on an ordinary day, one of those days that quietly decide your future while you're busy living it. We were sitting together, doing nothing important. The room was calm. The kind of calm that only exists when there's no urgency left to prove anything. And suddenly, I realized something simple. This person, sitting next to me, felt like home. Not the place. Not the country. Not the plan. The person. In English, people often ask, "Is your partner your safe place?" For a long time, I didn't fully understand that question. I thought safety meant stability. Or financial security. Or certainty about the future. But safety, I learned, is much quieter than that. Safety is being able to speak slowly without apologizing. Safety is not having to translate your emotions. Safety is being seen, without being explained. That's when I understood. I didn't just marry someone I loved. I married my best friend. Someone who had seen me at my weakest, not once, but many times. Someone who knew my fears before I admitted them. Someone who never tried to rush my growth or simplify my questions. Our marriage wasn't built on perfection. It was built on repair. We repaired misunderstandings. We repaired silence. We repaired expectations that didn't fit anymore. Living in the United States taught us a lot about independence. Marriage taught us something else, interdependence. Not losing yourself, but choosing to walk together. In real English, there's a phrase I love. We're on the same team. That became our foundation. Not me versus you. Not who's right. Just us versus the problem. And when life tested us again, and it did, we didn't panic the same way we used to. We paused. We talked. We listened. The challenges didn't disappear. But our response changed. We became gentler, with ourselves and with each other. We learned that love isn't about intensity. It's about consistency. About showing up on normal days. About choosing kindness when frustration is easier. About staying curious instead of defensive. And slowly, without noticing at first, something else grew. A family. Not just in the traditional sense, but in meaning. A shared rhythm. Shared values. Shared silence that felt comfortable, not empty. When children entered our lives, the definition of safe place expanded again. It wasn't just about us anymore. It was about creating a home where mistakes were allowed. Where language didn't have to be perfect to be understood. Where love wasn't earned, it was assumed. Our English improved along the way, naturally. Not through pressure, but through presence. Because when you feel safe, your brain relaxes. And when your brain relaxes, learning happens. That's not motivational talk, it's neuroscience. Stress shuts down learning. Safety opens it up. That's why this story matters. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's real. If you're learning English and feeling stuck, overwhelmed, or tired, maybe the problem isn't your ability. Maybe it's your environment. Maybe you don't need more discipline. Maybe you need more safety. Someone, or something, that allows you to be a beginner without shame. Someone who doesn't rush your process. Someone who stays. Marriage doesn't magically solve life. But when it's built on friendship, it becomes a place where growth feels possible. Looking back, I see that every hard moment led here. The loneliness. The confusion. The questions about belonging. They weren't obstacles. They were preparation. If I hadn't been lost, I wouldn't have recognized home. If I hadn't struggled, I wouldn't have valued safety. If I hadn't learned to listen, I wouldn't have known how to love. So yes, I married my best friend. And in doing so, I found something bigger than success. I found peace. If you're listening to this and wondering whether your partner is your safe place, or whether you're allowed to want that, let me say this clearly. You are. Love doesn't have to hurt to be real. Growth doesn't have to be lonely. And learning, language or life, doesn't have to feel like a battle. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is choose someone who feels like home. If you stayed until this moment, it means something in this story touched you. Maybe it wasn't the marriage. Maybe it wasn't the move to the United States. Maybe it was the quiet question hiding underneath everything. Is there a place where I don't have to pretend anymore? This channel is for people who are tired of learning English like a task and ready to experience it like a life. Here, English is not rushed. Feelings are not corrected. And growth is allowed to be slow, human, and real. If you're learning English and sometimes feel lost. If you're building a life far from where you started. If you believe language is easier when your heart feels safe, then this space is for you. Every story here is designed to help you listen deeper, read with emotion, and speak without fear. Through real experiences, real love, and real struggles. And this story doesn't end here. The next videos will go deeper into real marriage moments in the U.S. Everyday English you don't learn in textbooks, emotional listening practice that actually stays with you, and stories that feel like someone is finally speaking for you. So if you don't want to lose this feeling, subscribe to the channel, like this video if it resonated with you, comment one sentence you felt but never said out loud, because sometimes, learning English isn't about words. It's about finding a place where your voice finally feels welcome. And if you're still here, you're already part of the journey.